Did you know Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, gave away up to 50% of his earnings to his manager for most of his career? Or that, despite being one of the most famous people on the planet, he never performed a single concert outside of North America after his initial rise to fame. And incredibly, in the last year of his life, one doctor prescribed him over 10,000 doses of various pills. Number 6. The Colonel Parker Paradox, signing a lifelong deal with a mystery man. Imagine being the hottest star on the planet. Everyone wants a piece of you. Record companies, movie studios, advertisers, they're all lining up. You need someone sharp, someone experienced, someone trustworthy to navigate this whirlwind. Enter Colonel Tom Parker. In 1955, Elvis was managed by Bob Neal under a standard contract. But Colonel Parker, a promoter with a background in carnivals and managing country singer Eddie Arnold, saw something bigger. Parker had a knack for promotion, a relentless drive, and an undeniable ability to make noise and get attention. He started inserting himself into Elvis's career, first as a special advisor. The pivotal moment came in 1956. Parker convinced Elvis and his parents, Vernon and Gladys, that he was the only one who could take Elvis to the next level: national television movies, superstardom beyond imagination. He presented them with contracts. One key contract, signed on March 26, 1956, appointed Parker as Elvis's sole and exclusive advisor, personal representative, and manager. Here's where the criticism often starts. The terms. Initially, Parker's commission was 25%. That was already high for the time. Standard was often 10 to 15%, but arguably justifiable given the explosion in Elvis's fame under Parker's initial guidance, the RCA deal, the Ed Sullivan appearances, the movie contracts. However, the structure of their relationship evolved. Over the years, Parker's cut reportedly increased. Some accounts suggest it eventually reached an unprecedented 50% of Elvis's total earnings, before expenses or taxes on certain deals, particularly later in his career with merchandising and live performances. This figure is staggering compared to industry norms. But the percentage wasn't the only point of contention. The duration and scope of the agreement were immense. It wasn't a standard few years contract. It was essentially for Elvis's entire professional life. Parker had near total control over every aspect of Elvis's career. Recording sessions, song choices, often favoring publishers Parker had deals with, movie roles, television appearances, and crucially, live performances. Who was Colonel Tom Parker? That itself became a source of intrigue and later criticism. He wasn't actually a colonel. The title was honorary, bestowed by a Louisiana governor, and his real name wasn't Tom Parker. He was Andreas Cornelis van Kuijeke, an immigrant from the Netherlands who had entered the United States apparently without legal documentation in the 1920s. He served briefly in the U.S. Army, but reportedly deserted, and later received a discharge possibly linked to a psychological evaluation. His past was shrouded in mystery, and he fiercely guarded his privacy and origins. Some biographers and critics later suggested that this background, specifically his potential lack of a U.S. passport and fear of being unable to re-enter the country, was the real reason Elvis never toured internationally during his peak global fame. Parker's management style was often described as controlling and focused heavily on maximizing short-term profit. He negotiated massive deals, particularly the initial RCA contract buyout from Sun Records for $35,000, an enormous sum then, and lucrative movie deals. He plastered Elvis's face on everything imaginable: charm, bracelets, lipstick, teddy bears, board games. This merchandising blitz brought in millions, but also led to criticism that it cheapened Elvis's image, turning him from a rebellious musical force into a commercial product. While Parker undeniably played a huge role in Elvis's initial breakthrough and sustained his career through various phases, critics point to the immense financial cost to Elvis, the alleged creative limitations imposed by Parker's choices, like the repetitive movie roles or song selections, monetizing publishing rights, or songcistic Mayfrey might the risk that seemed to grow around Elvis, with Parker acting as a powerful gatekeeper. The decision to grant one man, particularly one with such a mysterious past and unusually high commission demands, such sweeping and lifelong control over his career, remains one of the most debated aspects of Elvis's story. He effectively signed away a massive chunk of his autonomy and fortune at the very beginning of his superstardom. Number 5. Hollywood Haze, trading musical grit for movie formula. Before the Army, Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was a cultural earthquake. Hits like Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, and Jailhouse Rock were just songs. They were declarations of a new era. He had raw energy, a unique sound blending country blues and gospel, and a stage presence that mesmerized and scandalized audiences. He also showed flashes of genuine acting potential in films like Loving You, 1957, Jailhouse Rock, 1957, and especially King Creole, 1958. Directed by Michael Curtiz of Casablanca fame and co-starring Walter Matthau, King Creole was a serious drama that earned Elvis some of his best acting reviews. Many believed he had the potential to become a respected actor. Then came the Army, 1958 to 1960. When Sergeant Presley returned, the musical landscape had shifted slightly, and Colonel Parker had a plan. The focus shifted decisively from challenging music and potentially serious acting roles towards a relentless stream of Hollywood musicals. The decision driven by Parker and agreed to by Elvis was to prioritize movies over live performances and groundbreaking records. The logic seemed sound on paper. Movies offered huge paychecks, global exposure, and soundtrack albums that sold reliably well. Parker negotiated lucrative multi-picture deals with studios like Paramount and MGM. Hal Wallace, a producer Elvis worked with frequently, was particularly adept at creating the Elvis movie template. And what was that template? Typically, it involved Elvis playing a charming character: race car driver, boat captain, photographer, pilot, rodeo rider, etc., in an exotic or pleasant location: Hawaii, Florida, Las Vegas, Acapulco. He would encounter some minor conflict, romance one or more attractive women, and sing a dozen or so songs loosely inserted into the plot. The music itself often shifted from the raw rock and roll of his early days to lighter pop tunes, ballads, and novelty songs, tailored for the film's setting. From 1960, GI Blues, to 1969, Change of Habit, Elvis starred in a staggering 27 movies. That's an average of almost 3 films per year. While some were initially successful financially, Blue Hawaii, Viva Las Vegas, the quality and box office returns generally declined over the decade. The films became increasingly formulaic, low budget, and critically panned. Titles like Harem, Scarum, Paradise, Hawaiian Style, Clambake, and The Trouble with Girls became synonymous with kitsch and creative stagnation. The soundtrack albums followed a similar trajectory, While early post-Army soundtracks like GI Blues and Blue Hawaii were massive sellers, later ones often featured weaker material, rushed recordings, and dipped significantly in chart performance compared to his 1950s peak or his later 1969 comeback. Elvis himself reportedly grew deeply unhappy with the quality of the films and the songs he was asked to record for them. There are accounts of him complaining bitterly about the scripts, the repetitive nature of the roles, and the often subpar music. He allegedly referred to some scripts as travelogues. He longed for more challenging acting roles, but Colonel Parker consistently steered him back towards the profitable, predictable formula. Parker reportedly believed that serious roles wouldn't sell as well and might alienate the existing fan base built on the light-hearted musical comedies. This decade, spent largely churning out movies, is heavily criticized for several reasons. Musically, Elvis missed out on much of the cultural and artistic ferment of the 1960s. The British invasion, the rise of Motown folk rock, psychedelia. While he was singing about clam bakes, artists like the Beatles, Bob Dylan, and the Rolling Stones were redefining popular music. His relevance as a cutting-edge musical force waned considerably during this period. Creatively, his potential as a serious actor, hinted at in King Creole, was never truly explored. He became trapped in a lucrative but artistically stifling cycle. The decision to prioritize quantity over quality in his film career, guided by Parker's focus on easy money, effectively put Elvis's musical evolution on hold for nearly a decade and squandered his acting ambitions. It was a period that made him incredibly wealthy but cost him dearly in terms of artistic credibility and connection to the changing musical times. Many fans and critics see this movie period as a lost decade, a detour that took him far from the electrifying promise of his early career. Number 4. Uncle Sam's Call. Choosing the Barracks over the Stage, December 20th, 1957. Elvis Presley, arguably the most famous young man in the world, received his draft notice from the U.S. Army. This wasn't just news, it was a national event. How would the king of rock and roll, the swivel-hipped icon of youthful rebellion, handle military service? The context is Elvis was at the absolute zenith of his early fame. His records dominated the charts, his concerts caused pandemonium, and his television appearances were ratings blockbusters. A 2-year interruption from military service seemed like it could derail everything. There were options. Given his immense fame and talent, avenues existed for Elvis to serve in a way that minimized disruption to his career and utilized his skills. The Navy and Air Force reportedly offered opportunities, perhaps in recruitment or public relations. More significantly, the Army's own Special Services Division actively sought him out. This branch was responsible for entertaining the troops. Serving in special services would have allowed Elvis to continue performing, potentially recording, wear a uniform but live in comfortable off-base housing, and essentially maintain his public persona while fulfilling his military obligation. Other stars had taken similar paths. Colonel Parker, however, advised a different course. Elvis should serve as a regular soldier. No special treatment. He should get his hair cut, wear the standard uniform, go through basic training, and be assigned duties just like any other GI. Parker's reasoning, publicly at least, was strategic. He believed this approach would cultivate goodwill with the American public, particularly older generations who might view Elvis with suspicion. It would portray Elvis as a patriotic, regular guy doing his duty, effectively taming his rebellious image and broadening his appeal. Parker meticulously managed the PR around Elvis's induction and service, ensuring maximum positive press coverage. The photos of Elvis getting his famous hair shorn were iconic. Elvis, trusting Parker's judgment and perhaps feeling a genuine sense of duty, agreed. He was inducted on March 24, 1958. He completed basic training at Fort Hood, Texas, and was later stationed with the 3rd Armored Division in Freiburg, West Germany. By all accounts, he served commendably, earning the rank of sergeant. He made efforts to blend in, though his fame inevitably set him apart. But the criticism of this decision centers on the impact it had on his artistic trajectory and the potential alternatives. Serving as a regular G, I meant a complete halt to his live performances and public appearances for 2 years. While Parker kept his name alive through pre-recorded material and merchandise, the momentum inevitably slowed. The raw, explosive energy of 1956 to 57, Elvis was effectively put on ice. Furthermore, the experience changed Elvis. While in Germany, his mother Gladys passed away back in Memphis in August 1958, a devastating blow from which many say he never fully recovered. It was also during his time in Germany that he met Priscilla Bowley, who would later become his wife. And significantly, it's reported that his introduction to prescription drugs, particularly amphetamines, to stay alert on maneuvers and potentially barbiturates to relax or sleep, began during his military service. When Elvis returned in March 1960, he was subtly different. The media narrative, carefully shaped by Parker, presented a more mature, clean-cut image. His first post-Army appearance was on a Frank Sinatra TV special, singing alongside the established crooner. A symbolic passing of a torch, perhaps, but also a signal of a shift towards a more mainstream, less dangerous persona. This paved the way for the Hollywood movie era that followed. Critics argue that by choosing the path of a regular soldier, Elvis and Parker missed a crucial opportunity. Special services could have allowed him to continue developing musically, perhaps collaborating with Army musicians, performing live and staying connected to his core audience in a more dynamic way. Instead, the 2-year hiatus created a distinct break, after which Parker steered him towards the safer, more controlled environment of Hollywood movie sets. The decision, while perhaps a PR success in the short term by making Elvis seem more palatable to mainstream America, fundamentally altered his career path, potentially sacrificing of his early years, the unique energy of his early years for the sake of image management and conformity. It marked the end of the initial rock and roll phenomenon and the beginning of Elvis, the all-around entertainer. Number 3. Viva Las Vegas, Forever. The golden handcuffs of the desert. The year is 1968. Elvis, after years in the Hollywood wilderness, churning out B movies, stages a monumental comeback with a television special. Originally conceived by Colonel Parker as a cozy Christmas show producer, Steve Binder fought to showcase the raw, vital Elvis. Clad in black leather, performing his classic hits with primal energy, Elvis reminded the world why he was the king. The '68 comeback special was a triumph, reigniting his musical career and critical acclaim. The question was, what next? The special proved there was a massive appetite for live Elvis performances. Colonel Parker saw an opportunity, not necessarily for a groundbreaking world tour or innovative new recordings, but for something immensely lucrative and controllable: Las Vegas. In July, 1969, Elvis opened at the newly built International Hotel in Las Vegas, later the Las Vegas Hilton. His return to live performing after nearly 8 years, excluding the '68 special taping, was electric. The shows were a sensation. Elvis was in great shape, vocally powerful, backed by a superb band, the TCB Band, and orchestra. He performed his hits, gospel favorites, and contemporary covers. These initial Vegas engagements were critically acclaimed and hugely successful, re-establishing him as a top-tier live performer. The decision that draws criticism wasn't the return to Vegas itself, but the nature of the commitment that followed. Colonel Parker negotiated a long-term, exclusive contract with the International Hotel. Initially, it involved performing 2-month-long engagements, or stands per year, typically February and August. Each stand involved performing 2 shows per night, 7 nights a week, a grueling schedule. This deal was incredibly profitable for both Elvis and Parker. Elvis was reportedly paid astronomical sums for these engagements. Vegas provided a stable, predictable, and easily manageable environment for Parker. No complex tour logistics, no dealing with different promoters in different cities, just a single venue where everything could be controlled. However, this long-term Vegas residency became what many describe as golden handcuffs. While it provided financial security, it also locked Elvis into a repetitive routine for much of the 1970s. Year after year, it was back to the International Hilton for punishing month-long runs. While Elvis did tour other parts of the U.S. between Vegas engagements, the Vegas shows became the anchor of his career. Over time, the grind reportedly took its toll. Accounts from band members, backup singers, and members of Elvis's entourage, the Memphis Mafia, describe a growing weariness and boredom setting in. The set lists sometimes became predictable. While Elvis was capable of brilliant performances throughout the 70s, there were also nights where he seemed to be going through the motions, relying on charisma and stage banter rather than musical fire. His weight fluctuated, often noticeably increasing during the Vegas runs. His dependency on prescription medications reportedly escalated, fueled perhaps by the need to psych himself up for performances and then wind down afterwards, day after day, night after night. Critics argue that the intense focus on Las Vegas limited Elvis's artistic growth and reach during the 70s. He was largely performing for casino audiences, a different environment than the arenas filled with dedicated fans he played while on tour. The Vegas format, with its dinner shows and late shows, its emphasis on spectacle, jumpsuits, karate moves, elaborate arrangements, arguably catered to a specific type of entertainment rather than pushing musical boundaries. While he did introduce new songs and interact spontaneously with the audience, the sheer repetition of the venue and schedule seemed to contribute to a sense of stagnation for some observers. The decision to make Las Vegas the central pillar of his performing career for the last 8 years of his life, driven by Parker's desire for control and easy profits, ensured Elvis remained a top earner. But it also confined him, physically and perhaps creatively, to a demanding and ultimately draining cycle. Instead of potentially evolving his live shows, exploring different types of venues, or taking his music to a global audience, he became the king of the Vegas Strip, a residency that brought immense financial rewards but arguably contributed to his isolation, health problems, and artistic plateauing in his final years. Number 2. Grounded Eagle: The Mystery of Why Elvis Never Toured the World. Elvis Presley was a global phenomenon almost from the start. His records sold millions of copies across Europe, Asia, Australia, and South America. His movies were shown worldwide. His face and voice were recognized everywhere. Teenagers from Tokyo to London to Sydney screamed his name. Logically, a world tour seemed inevitable, a guaranteed success that would connect him directly with his massive international fan base and generate enormous revenue. Yet after some very early Canadian dates in 1957, Elvis Presley never performed a concert outside of North America for the rest of his life. Think about that. One of the most famous entertainers in history, with legions of fans across the planet, never took his electrifying live show to them. Why? The decision, or perhaps the lack of a decision, to tour internationally lies almost entirely at the feet of Colonel Tom Parker. Parker consistently refused or deflected any serious offers for Elvis to perform overseas. The demand was certainly there. Promoters from the UK, Europe, Japan, and Australia made lucrative proposals over the years, sometimes offering unprecedented sums of money. Fans constantly clamored for international dates. Parker always had reasons or excuses. Sometimes it was security concern. Sometimes he claimed the venues weren't suitable or large enough to make it financially worthwhile, despite evidence to the contrary. Sometimes he argued that foreign taxes or logistical challenges were too complex. He would often counter-propose closed-circuit television broadcasts or movies as alternatives, keeping Elvis physically within the U.S. and Parker's direct control. The famous Aloha from Hawaii concert in 1973, broadcast via satellite to many parts of the world, though delayed in some regions including the U.S. mainland initially, was presented by Parker as Elvis reaching his global audience, without actually having to leave American soil. However, many biographers, musicians who worked with Elvis, and industry observers point to a more personal and clandestine reason: Colonel Parker's own uncertain immigration status. As mentioned earlier, Parker, born Andreas van Kwijeke, was a Dutch national who likely entered the U.S. illegally. He never became a naturalized U.S. citizen. It's widely speculated that Parker feared if he left the United States, he might not be allowed back in. Traveling abroad would require a passport, which he likely could not obtain without revealing his true identity and potentially facing deportation or legal issues related to his past, including his army desertion. Therefore, to protect his own position and secrets, Parker effectively kept Elvis tethered to North America. Elvis himself reportedly expressed a desire to travel and perform for his fans abroad, particularly in England and Europe. There are accounts of him being disappointed and frustrated by the inability to tour internationally. Yet he seemingly never forced the issue, deferring to Parker's judgment or accepting his explanations. The criticism here is multifaceted. Firstly, it represents a massive missed opportunity for Elvis personally and professionally. He was denied the experience of connecting directly with millions of adoring fans worldwide. Imagine the cultural impact of Elvis lived in London, Paris, Tokyo, or Sydney during the 60s or 70s. Secondly, it represents a huge amount of potential income left on the table, likely tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars over the years. Thirdly, it highlights the extraordinary and arguably detrimental level of control Parker exerted over Elvis's life and career, potentially his own personal predicament over his client's artistic and personal desires. Elvis Presley remains one of the very few global music superstars of his magnitude, never to have undertaken a major international tour. The decision to keep the world's biggest star confined primarily to the United States, seemingly due to the personal circumstances of his manager, stands as one of the most baffling and criticized aspects of his entire career. It denied generations of international fans the chance to see the king live and arguably limited the full global scope of his cultural impact during his lifetime. Number 1. The final years. Ignoring the alarms on health and prescription drugs. The story of Elvis Presley's final years is inextricably linked with his declining health and heavy reliance on prescription medications. This wasn't a single decision, but rather a series of ongoing choices by Elvis himself and arguably by those around him to manage or mismanage his physical and mental well-being, leading to tragic consequences. The pressures on Elvis were immense. The relentless demands of fame, the grueling performance schedules in Las Vegas and on tour, the dissatisfaction with aspects of his career, personal relationship struggles, and the difficulty of maintaining any semblance of a normal life. Added to this were various underlying health issues that developed over the years, reportedly including high blood pressure, glaucoma, colon problems, megacolon, and possibly liver damage. To cope with the physical demands of performing, the inability to sleep, due to erratic schedules and perhaps emotional pain, Elvis began relying on a cocktail of prescription drugs. Sources close to him, including members of the Memphis Mafia and medical professionals involved later, indicate this reliance likely began or escalated during his army years and continued throughout his life. The drugs weren't illegal street drugs. They were pharmaceuticals prescribed by doctors. Amphetamines to provide energy for shows, barbiturates, and sedatives to induce sleep, afterward painkillers for various ailments, relaxants, and more. A key figure in this later period was Dr. George Nicopolis, known as Dr. Nick. He became Elvis's primary physician and traveled with him extensively. Dr. Nick maintained that he tried to manage Elvis's drug intake, sometimes substituting placebos, and attempted to address his underlying health problems. However, the sheer volume of medications prescribed is staggering. Investigations after Elvis's death revealed the extent of the prescriptions. In the first 8 months of 1977 alone, Dr. Nick reportedly prescribed over 10,000 doses of various pills, sedatives, amphetamines, narcotics to Elvis. While Dr. Nick was later acquitted of criminal charges related to Elvis's death, his medical license was eventually suspended and later permanently revoked by the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners for overprescribing to numerous patients, including Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis. The criticism surrounding this period focuses on the apparent lack of effective intervention. Elvis's physical deterioration in the mid to late 1970s was often visible. His weight fluctuated dramatically. He sometimes appeared bloated and unwell, and his performances could be erratic. There were instances of slurred speech, forgotten lyrics, and shortened shows. Friends and members of his entourage reportedly expressed concern, but Elvis often dismissed worries or became angry when confronted. He was the king, surrounded by employees and associates, and challenging him directly was difficult. Some question whether Colonel Parker, focused primarily on keeping the lucrative show going, did enough to address the obviously declining health of his star client. Others point to the responsibility of the medical professionals involved. And ultimately, many acknowledge Elvis's own role in his dependency. He actively sought out the medications and resisted attempts by some to curb his intake or address the root causes of his health issues and dependency. He reportedly believed he needed the drugs to maintain his demanding lifestyle and performance schedule. There were specific incidents that served as alarming warning signs. Hospitalizations for various health crises, performances where he was clearly unwell, concerns raised by worried band members or backup singers. Yet, the cycle continued. The decision perhaps made daily was to keep going, to fulfill the tour dates, to make the next Vegas engagement, often enabled by the administration of more medication to get through it. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive at his Graceland mansion. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, but the contributing role of polypharmacy, the use of multiple drugs, was undeniable. The autopsy report and subsequent investigations detailed the array of prescription drugs found in his system. The failure to effectively manage Elvis's health, the normalization of excessive prescription drug use within his inner circle, and the inability or unwillingness to halt the demanding schedule to allow for genuine recovery are seen by many as the most tragic decisions, or series of non-decisions, in his life. It wasn't a single choice like signing a contract or accepting a movie role, but a creeping, ongoing crisis that was allowed to escalate. Warnings were seemingly ignored, concerns downplayed, and the relentless demands of being Elvis took precedence over the well-being of the man, Elvis Presley, leading ultimately to his premature death at the age of 42.